ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to talk about a danger that affects us all, the danger of falling in love with a fantasy. It's an allure that promises us comfort, excitement, and fulfillment. But the truth is, we live in a world that is complex, unpredictable, and often painful. And when we lose touch with that reality, when we allow ourselves to be seduced by idealized images of what life could be like, instead of engaging with the life we actually have, we lose something precious. First, let's acknowledge the undeniable truth that fantasies are deeply attractive. We imagine the perfect relationship, the perfect job, the perfect life. These fantasies serve as a refuge, a mental escape from the monotony or struggle we often face. But here's the problem: fantasies, by their very nature, are disconnected from reality. They offer us an easy out, a world where everything is as we wish it to be, where every problem has a simple solution, and every person is as we want them to be. But this is the first danger of fantasy: it disconnects us from the world as it is. If we spend too much time in that imaginary world, we stop seeing the world around us with clear eyes. We stop understanding the truth of our own situation, the challenges that need to be faced, and the work that needs to be done. In the end, this disconnection makes us weaker, not stronger. The world we live in requires engagement, not retreat. Now let's talk about perfection. Fantasy is built on the illusion of perfection, a perfect relationship, a perfect life, a perfect career. But perfection is a myth. It's a distortion. The truth is that no person, no situation, no life is flawless. We are all flawed beings, navigating a messy, complicated existence. And that's okay. It's these imperfections that give life depth, meaning, and texture. If we fall in love with a fantasy of perfection, we will inevitably be disappointed when reality doesn't measure up. And when we're disappointed, we begin to withdraw, to give up, to retreat even further into our fantasies. But here's the key: personal growth is rooted in reality, not fantasy. You cannot grow if you are constantly trying to escape from the challenges that are presented to you. Growth comes through facing difficulties head-on, confronting the obstacles that stand in your way, and learning to navigate the imperfect world we live in. Only when we engage with reality and work to improve it do we begin to transform ourselves. Unfortunately, fantasy also has a way of fostering unrealistic expectations. We begin to project these fantasies onto other people. We imagine that the people in our lives should act a certain way, behave according to our ideals, or fulfill the roles we've dreamed up for them. But here's the problem with that: it's unfair to both them and ourselves. People are not characters in a movie. They are complex individuals with their own flaws, their own struggles, and their own dreams. When we expect them to fit into a fantasy mold, we set ourselves and them up for disappointment. And let's not forget, perfection in relationships, as in life, does not exist. If you are waiting for someone who checks every box, who never makes mistakes, who never falters, you are destined to spend your life chasing an illusion. True relationships, true love, come not from perfection, but from acceptance. Acceptance of flaws, acceptance of imperfection, acceptance of the fact that every person is doing their best with the tools they have. It's through this acceptance that meaningful connections are built. We must also recognize that fulfillment and meaning in life come from responsibility, not from the pursuit of fantasy. When we take responsibility for our actions, our choices, our relationships, we create a life that is grounded in purpose. When we lean into responsibility, we stop waiting for some magical, perfect scenario to appear. Instead, we take ownership of our circumstances and begin to shape them. That's when true satisfaction emerges, not from wishing for something better, but from making something better. So, let me end with this: do not fall in love with a fantasy. The real world is imperfect. It's hard. It's messy. But it's also full of opportunities, full of challenges, and full of people who are just as human as you are. Life is not about escaping to a dream world. It's about facing the world as it is, accepting it for all its flaws, and taking responsibility for shaping it into something meaningful. When you do this, when you focus on what is real, you'll find that the life you build, though imperfect, is far more rewarding than any fantasy could ever promise. Fantasy has a magnetic pull on the human mind, one that is difficult to resist. It's in our nature to dream, to envision a life that surpasses the ordinary and mundane, to create an idealized world where everything falls into place as we wish it would. The power of fantasy lies in its ability to provide comfort in times of uncertainty, offering a temporary escape from the harsh realities of life. When faced with dissatisfaction, frustration, or pain, our minds instinctively craft a vision of something better, something more perfect. This idealized world is often free from conflict, hardship, and the struggles that we encounter in the real world. We see it in how we picture the perfect relationship, the dream job, or the perfect version of ourselves. In these fantasies, people are exactly as we want them to be, and our circumstances align with the vision we hold. The problem is that this allure is dangerous. While these fantasies may feel like a safe haven, they come at a cost, the cost of losing touch with the reality of our lives. One of the most compelling reasons we fall into the trap of fantasy is that it gives us hope. Hope is a powerful force. It can push us forward when everything feels stagnant, and it can inspire us to keep going when we feel like giving up. But hope is not the same as a fantasy. Hope is grounded in possibility, in the belief that things can improve with effort, time, and persistence. A fantasy, on the other hand, is rooted in the desire to escape reality entirely, often through an imagined future that is devoid of the complexities and messiness that life brings. What happens when we invest too much in these fantasies is that we become disconnected from the present moment. Instead of focusing on what is in front of us, our responsibilities, our relationships, and the work required to make meaningful change, we become consumed by the idea of an idealized version of life. This fantasy life might feel like a sanctuary, but in truth, it's a distraction. It keeps us from confronting the reality of our situation, and worse, it creates a gap between what we wish life could be and what it actually is. When we constantly live in this imagined world, we begin to lose the ability to see the beauty and potential in the reality we have. Escaping into fantasy also limits our growth. We all face struggles, disappointments, and obstacles, and while no one enjoys these challenges, they are integral to our development as individuals. The key to personal growth is not in avoiding hardship, but in learning how to navigate it. If we spend too much time in our fantasy world, we risk missing out on the lessons that come from real-life experiences. Fantasy offers no opportunity for growth. It only perpetuates stagnation by suggesting that life should always be effortless, seamless, and painless. In contrast, facing the difficulties of the real world, no matter how uncomfortable, is what allows us to learn, adapt, and transform. Furthermore, the idealized version of life that we often hold in our fantasies can create unrealistic expectations. We start expecting our relationships to be free from conflict, our work to be free from challenges, and ourselves to be flawless. These unrealistic expectations set us up for disappointment, as real life is rarely ever as simple or perfect as we imagine. The deeper we invest in these fantasies, the more likely we are to be disappointed when reality doesn't live up to our expectations. And when disappointment strikes, it can lead to feelings of frustration, resentment, and even depression. In a sense, falling in love with a fantasy can feel comforting. It's a way to keep hope alive when life feels too difficult. But we must remember that while fantasies may provide temporary solace, they ultimately prevent us from engaging with life as it is. The real world, with all its flaws, is the only one in which we can create meaningful change, growth, and connection. Living in a fantasy world comes with the inherent danger of disconnecting from reality. When we immerse ourselves too deeply in a dream world of idealized scenarios, we risk losing sight of the real world around us, the one that is tangible, filled with complexities and challenges that demand our attention. We may be tempted to escape into the realm of fantasy because it offers an attractive refuge, a place where things are simpler, where there are fewer obstacles to overcome. But in doing so, we disengage from the reality that requires our participation, our effort, and our ability to adapt. Reality, no matter how imperfect or challenging, is the framework within which we operate. It's where we face the consequences of our actions, learn from our mistakes, and take steps toward creating change. When we begin to focus on an imagined version of life, we stop responding to what is right in front of us. Our responsibilities, relationships, and personal growth become secondary to the idealized version of life we're chasing. The real world has its own set of rules. There are limits to what we can control, and we are constantly faced with obstacles that challenge us to grow. It is through these obstacles that we build resilience, wisdom, and emotional maturity. Without them, we stagnate, stuck in a world of fantasy where everything remains static and untested. By detaching from the real world, we not only hinder our ability to grow, but also risk neglecting the very things that can bring us fulfillment. Our relationships, for instance, require attention, communication, and effort to thrive. Yet, when we place our hopes in a fantasy of a perfect partner or an idealized form of love, we overlook the complexities that real relationships demand. We may project unrealistic expectations onto others, expecting them to fulfill a role that only exists in our fantasies. As a result, we miss the opportunity to engage authentically with the people around us, building deep, meaningful connections based on mutual understanding and acceptance of imperfection. Similarly, our professional lives also demand engagement with reality. Success is rarely handed to us on a silver platter, nor does it come without hard work, persistence, and failure. When we invest too much in a fantasy of effortlessly achieving success, we ignore the discipline, skill building, and resilience required to make our dreams a reality. Fantasy offers an easy path where obstacles simply don't exist, but this is far from the truth of the journey toward meaningful achievement. Without confronting the challenges and setbacks that inevitably arise, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to develop the capacity to overcome them. In a broader sense, detaching from reality also keeps us from contributing to the collective well-being of society. We are all part of a larger community, and our actions impact the world around us. Yet, when we retreat into a fantasy world, we fail to see how we fit into that larger picture. We stop questioning, stop taking responsibility, and stop striving to make a difference in the ways that matter. Fantasy can feel like a solution, but it ultimately narrows our focus to a world that doesn't require us to act, to grow, or to contribute. It is only when we accept reality, with all its imperfections and challenges, that we begin to understand the impact we can have not just on ourselves, but on the world at large. By choosing to engage with reality, we embrace the inherent messiness and unpredictability of life. And while it can be uncomfortable, it is also where the most growth occurs. We can only truly live, learn, and make a difference when we are present in the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. When we detach from reality, we may feel a sense of temporary relief, but we risk losing our ability to respond to life in a meaningful way. Perfection, in all its forms, is an illusion, one that often blinds us to the truth of life. We are conditioned to strive for idealized versions of reality, whether it's a flawless partner, a perfect job, or an unattainable standard of beauty or success. These images are powerful because they promise us a sense of completion, a world where everything aligns perfectly, where there are no flaws, no imperfections, and no struggle. But this promise is deceptive because perfection, as we imagine it, simply does not exist. The danger of striving for perfection lies in the fact that it is inherently unattainable. No relationship is without its challenges, no career is without its setbacks, no person is without their flaws. Perfection is a moving target, a dream that keeps shifting just out of reach, always just beyond our grasp. The more we chase it, the further we move away from the reality of life, and the more frustrated and disillusioned we become. We set ourselves up for failure by expecting something that is not only unachievable but also unnecessary for a fulfilling life. Take relationships, for example. The idea of a perfect partner is something many of us fall into, often without realizing it. We picture someone who fulfills all of our needs, someone who never disagrees with us, someone who shares our every interest, and who loves us unconditionally at all times. This fantasy can be appealing, especially when faced with the complexities of real relationships. But when we search for perfection in others, we forget that all human beings are inherently flawed. Each person brings their own history, baggage, and imperfections to the table, and those imperfections are part of what makes a relationship rich and dynamic. When we expect perfection, we overlook the beauty of the messy, imperfect connection that can be formed through vulnerability, understanding, and growth. The best relationships aren't those without conflict, they are those in which both individuals navigate the messiness of life together, learning and evolving as they go. Similarly, our careers and personal achievements often fall victim to this pursuit of perfection. Many people imagine the perfect career, one that provides constant satisfaction, recognition, and success. But the reality is that every job, every endeavor is accompanied by difficulties, disappointments, and challenges that require hard work and perseverance to overcome. Perfection in a career is a mirage. True fulfillment comes not from avoiding difficulties, but from overcoming them, from learning new skills, solving complex problems, and adapting to change. The pursuit of perfection can lead to frustration because it obscures the value of the journey itself. It's not the flawless moments that define success, but the effort, resilience, and growth that come from engaging with the inevitable imperfections of the path. Even within ourselves, the desire for perfection can be paralyzing. We often set unrealistic expectations for our own behavior, appearance, and abilities, believing that we must meet an impossible standard to be worthy of love, success, or happiness. This self-imposed pressure can be overwhelming, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, and a constant feeling of inadequacy. We may look at others and imagine that they have it all together, but the truth is that everyone has their own struggles, their own insecurities, and their own imperfections. No one is immune to the complexities of life. The pursuit of self-perfection often distracts us from the far more important task of self-acceptance, recognizing and embracing who we truly are, with all our flaws and shortcomings. It is only through self-acceptance that we can begin to grow, change, and improve in a way that is meaningful and sustainable. Perfection, then, is a dangerous trap. It promises us an idealized version of life that is free from conflict, difficulty, and failure, but it fails to account for the beauty and richness that come from embracing the imperfect reality of existence. Life, in all its messy complexity, offers us the opportunity to grow, to learn, and to connect with others in ways that are meaningful and fulfilling. Perfection may seem like the ultimate goal, but the true reward comes from accepting imperfection within ourselves, within others, and within the world around us. Personal growth is a fundamental aspect of human existence. It is what allows us to evolve, improve, and ultimately find meaning in our lives. But growth doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't come from avoiding the hard truths of life or retreating into fantasy. It happens when we confront the challenges in front of us, face our fears, and engage with the world as it is, not as we wish it would be. When we fall in love with a fantasy, we do just that. We choose to live in an imaginary world where everything is easy, smooth, and effortless. But real life in the world we actually inhabit is full of obstacles, complexities, and difficulties. These are not things to be avoided, nor are they signs of failure. They are the very conditions through which growth emerges. When we avoid confronting the problems we face, whether they are personal struggles, relationship issues, or professional challenges, we limit our ability to learn, adapt, and ultimately change. Growth comes from struggle. It is the process of engaging with difficulty and using that engagement to transform ourselves. For instance, when we face a challenge in our career, perhaps a difficult project, a setback, or a failure, it's an opportunity to grow. We can choose to step back, retreat into a fantasy where everything is easy, or we can lean in and work through the problem. This process of confronting difficulty, analyzing our actions, adjusting our approach, and learning from our mistakes is what enables us to grow professionally. It builds resilience, creativity, and problem-solving skills, all of which are essential for long-term success. Without these struggles, we would have no way to develop the skills and wisdom that come from persevering through adversity. In relationships, the same principle applies. Many people envision a perfect relationship where there is no conflict, no misunderstandings, and no tension. This fantasy may sound comforting, but it's simply not grounded in reality. All relationships require work. They demand communication, compromise, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. If we are constantly chasing the fantasy of an effortless relationship, we miss the opportunity to grow alongside the other person. True intimacy and connection are not forged in a world where everything is easy. They are built through navigating differences, resolving conflicts, and learning to understand and accept each other's flaws. By facing these challenges, we build deeper, more authentic relationships, and we learn more about ourselves in the process. The same is true when it comes to our own personal development. We all have flaws, areas in which we need to grow and improve. It's tempting to avoid confronting these flaws, to bury them under a facade of perfection, or escape into a fantasy where they don't exist. But real growth occurs only when we confront our shortcomings head-on. This can be an uncomfortable process. It requires humility, self-reflection, and the willingness to acknowledge that we are not perfect. But it is through this process of facing our imperfections that we gain insight, strength, and self-awareness. Each flaw, each area of weakness, is an opportunity to grow, to push ourselves further, and to become better versions of ourselves. This is the paradox of personal growth that only happens when we engage with the parts of life we would rather avoid. If we stay trapped in a fantasy where everything is ideal, we miss the very opportunities that make us stronger and wiser. Growth is not about waiting for the perfect conditions. It is about learning to thrive despite the imperfections and challenges that life inevitably brings. When we choose to face reality, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable, we set ourselves on the path of true transformation, not the stagnant existence that comes from living in an imagined world. Growth demands our participation, our courage, and our commitment to reality. Only then can we truly evolve into the people we are capable of becoming. When we become enamored with a fantasy, we inevitably begin to develop unrealistic expectations. These expectations, often based on idealized visions of the future, shape the way we perceive ourselves, others, and the world around us. The more we invest in these fantasies, the more distorted our view of reality becomes. We start to believe that things should be perfect, that others should meet our expectations without fail, and that life should unfold according to our dreams. But this mindset, although comforting in its simplicity, sets us up for disappointment. One of the most dangerous aspects of living with unrealistic expectations is the way it distorts our perception of other people. We begin to project our fantasies onto those around us, imagining that they should behave, think, and feel exactly as we want them to. This can apply to romantic relationships, friendships, family dynamics, and even professional relationships. In a romantic relationship, for example, we may fantasize about a perfect partner, someone who always understands us, never disagrees, and meets our every need without question. This unrealistic ideal sets us up for failure because no one can live up to such a perfect standard. We all have flaws, preferences, and imperfections. Expecting someone to be constantly attuned to our desires and to never falter can lead to frustration, resentment, and even the breakdown of the relationship. When the other person inevitably fails to meet these lofty expectations, we feel let down, not realizing that we were asking for something impossible. This problem is not limited to romantic relationships. It extends to our friendships, family members, and colleagues as well. If we expect perfection from others, we are bound to be disappointed when people inevitably fall short. When we see others as extensions of our fantasies, we fail to recognize their humanity, their struggles, weaknesses, and complexities. This prevents us from forming real, authentic connections with the people in our lives. Instead of accepting them as they are, we constantly try to shape them into a version of themselves that fits into our idealized vision. And when this vision inevitably shatters, we are left feeling hurt, betrayed, and disillusioned. The same unrealistic expectations can extend to our own lives. When we live in a fantasy world, we begin to believe that success should come easily and without significant effort. We imagine that achieving our goals will be smooth and uncomplicated. But in reality, success is often the result of hard work, perseverance, and setbacks. When we expect things to unfold effortlessly, we become discouraged when we face challenges or encounter obstacles. This can lead to frustration and a sense of failure. We may abandon our dreams altogether, believing that we are not capable of achieving what we set out to do because things didn't go according to our fantasy. This is especially true when we compare our real struggles with the idealized successes of others, often fueled by social media or societal pressures, which create an illusion of perfection that is, in truth, unattainable for anyone. Unrealistic expectations also have a way of clouding our judgment. We stop seeing situations for what they truly are, and instead view them through the lens of our fantasies. This can lead to poor decision-making, as we make choices based on what we wish would happen rather than what is likely to occur. When we base our actions on an imagined outcome, we are more likely to make decisions that are disconnected from reality. These decisions can lead to disappointment and frustration because they are not grounded in what is possible or realistic. Living with unrealistic expectations ultimately harms our ability to appreciate the present moment. When we are always waiting for things to be perfect or expecting them to meet our fantasies, we overlook the beauty of what is real. Life is filled with imperfection. And it is through these imperfections that we find growth, joy, and meaning. By constantly chasing an ideal, we miss out on the richness of the experiences we already have. The key to finding peace and fulfillment lies not in fantasizing about a perfect life, but in accepting reality as it is, with all its flaws and complexities. This acceptance allows us to see the true value in the people around us, in the work we do, and in the lives we are living. Living in a fantasy world often leads to a profound sense of disappointment when reality fails to meet our expectations. The allure of a fantasy lies in its perfection, a world where everything is idealized, where our desires are fulfilled effortlessly, and where all our problems magically dissolve. However, when we return to the real world, we encounter a stark contrast. Life, with its messiness, imperfection, and unpredictability, rarely aligns with the perfect scenarios we imagine. This mismatch between fantasy and reality often leads to frustration, resentment, and a deep sense of dissatisfaction. One of the main reasons for this disappointment is that fantasy creates unrealistic expectations. We become accustomed to imagining life in a way that is far removed from the truth. We expect relationships to be free of conflict, work to be without challenge, and success to come with ease. But real relationships are built on communication, compromise, and overcoming differences. Work requires hard effort, dedication, and often involves dealing with obstacles and setbacks. Success is not a straight path, it is paved with mistakes, failures, and learning experiences. When we fantasize about an idealized version of life, We forget that the struggles we face are not anomalies, they are an integral part of the journey toward growth and achievement. When reality doesn't match the fantasy, disappointment inevitably follows. This feeling is intensified when we have built our entire identity or sense of fulfillment around an imagined future. For instance, if we have spent years fantasizing about a particular career, expecting it to be the key to our happiness, we may find that the job itself is not as fulfilling as we imagined. Perhaps it involves long hours, difficult colleagues, or tasks that don't inspire us in the way we envisioned. The gap between the dream and the reality is painful, and the disappointment that follows can lead to feelings of regret or even depression. This disillusionment can also extend to relationships where the perfect partner we imagine turns out to be flawed, just like everyone else. When we place too much emphasis on an idealized image of someone, we risk overlooking the complexities that make them human. When reality doesn't live up to this fantasy, the disappointment can create feelings of betrayal or frustration, even though the fault lies in our unrealistic expectations rather than the person themselves. Additionally, the longer we hold onto a fantasy, the harder it becomes to reconcile it with reality. The mind becomes attached to the idea of what should be rather than accepting what is. This attachment can prevent us from adapting to the real world. We may refuse to acknowledge or accept the imperfections and challenges that come with life because we are so fixated on our imagined version of how things should be. This constant tension between fantasy and reality leaves us feeling stuck, unable to fully engage with the present moment and the opportunities it offers. The dissonance between what we want and what we have creates a mental and emotional burden that weighs us down, draining our energy and making it harder to move forward. Another source of disappointment is the tendency to compare ourselves to the fantasies we hold. We look at others and imagine that their lives are perfect, free from the difficulties we face. This comparison can create a sense of inadequacy, as we believe that our lives should mirror the fantasy versions we see in our minds. Social media in particular exacerbates this issue by presenting highly curated, idealized snapshots of other people's lives. When we compare our reality to these glossy images, it can make us feel like we are falling short or that our efforts aren't good enough. This comparison deepens the gap between our dreams and our actual experiences, intensifying the sense of disappointment. The result of living with unrealistic expectations and comparing our lives to fantasy versions is a persistent feeling of dissatisfaction. We begin to view our real lives as inadequate, believing that we are not living up to some imagined standard. We stop appreciating what we have and begin to yearn for something that in reality may never exist. This constant dissatisfaction can lead to a downward spiral where we feel perpetually unhappy, unable to find contentment or peace in the present moment. The root of this unhappiness lies in the fantasy itself, which distracts us from the reality of what we can create, experience, and achieve. When we release the grip of fantasy and learn to accept life as it is flawed, imperfect, and messy, we open ourselves to the possibility of true fulfillment, one that is grounded in the present and shaped by our efforts, rather than an unattainable dream. When we immerse ourselves in a fantasy, we create a distorted sense of control over our lives. Fantasy offers us an illusion of mastery over our circumstances, an idealized version of the world where things unfold exactly as we wish, where we are in full command of our destinies, and where obstacles are mere stepping stones that we can navigate with ease. This false sense of control is comforting at first, but it can quickly become problematic when we are forced to confront the reality of life, which is far less predictable and controllable. In reality, life is full of uncertainty. We do not have control over every aspect of our environment or the people around us. Unexpected challenges, setbacks, and failures are inevitable. When we cling to a fantasy, we fail to recognize the value of learning to cope with these real-world uncertainties. The fantasy world tells us that we can avoid suffering or discomfort, while the real world teaches us that hardship is not only unavoidable but essential for growth. The more we resist this truth, the more we deny ourselves the opportunity to develop the resilience, problem-solving skills, and emotional maturity necessary to face life's difficulties. We become fixated on maintaining control, expecting that things should always go our way, which only sets us up for greater disappointment when they inevitably do not. The desire for control can also manifest in our relationships. When we view others through the lens of fantasy, we begin to expect them to behave according to our idealized vision. We want our partners, friends, or family members to always meet our needs, to think and act exactly as we wish. This desire for control leads to unrealistic expectations that no one can fulfill. Relationships, in their true form, are dynamic and require compromise, empathy, and acceptance of differences. When we try to force others into our fantasies, we fail to appreciate them for who they truly are. We miss out on the richness of authentic connections, choosing instead to impose our own visions of how things should be. This control-seeking mindset not only damages relationships but also limits the growth of both parties involved, as it stifles the genuine, evolving nature of human interaction. The illusion of control can also be detrimental to our personal development. In a fantasy world, we can imagine ourselves as perfect versions of ourselves, free from failure, fear, and doubt. We may fantasize about achieving our goals without ever having to face the difficulties that usually accompany success. However, real growth is born from confronting challenges head-on. Success is rarely achieved without setbacks or moments of uncertainty. When we are overly attached to the idea of control, we avoid the risks and failures that are necessary for progress. We may be afraid to take the necessary steps toward our goals because we fear losing control or facing failure. This fear, driven by an unrealistic desire to control every outcome, paralyzes us and prevents us from taking action. Moreover, when we are constantly trying to control our environment and our lives to fit into a fantasy, we overlook the beauty of spontaneity and discovery. Life is full of surprises, and some of the most meaningful experiences come from unexpected moments of joy or serendipity. The more rigidly we try to control everything, the less room there is for these unanticipated moments to enter our lives. We become so focused on making things unfold according to our desires that we lose sight of the opportunities that arise when we let go of the need for perfection and control. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs, and sometimes it is in our ability to adapt to these unexpected challenges that we discover our greatest strengths. A fixation on control can also limit our ability to trust and surrender to the flow of life. True mastery over our circumstances does not lie in trying to control every detail, but in learning to navigate the uncertainty with confidence. It is about accepting that we cannot control everything, but we can control how we respond to the situations we face. By embracing uncertainty, we allow ourselves to be more flexible, more creative, and more open to the possibilities that life presents. We stop trying to force life into a neat, manageable box and instead embrace the chaos, knowing that it is through this unpredictability that we can find our true path. This shift in mindset frees us from the constraints of the fantasy world and allows us to live more authentically, with greater peace and clarity. The pursuit of a fantasy often prevents us from fully experiencing the present moment. When we are lost in our fantasies, whether about relationships, success, or idealized futures, we are not fully engaging with the here and now. Instead, we are consumed with an imagined version of the world that doesn't exist. This fixation on a future that may never come or a perfect world that isn't real distracts us from the richness of our current reality. In the process, we miss out on the beauty, joy, and growth that can only come from fully embracing the present. Many people are conditioned to think that happiness lies in the future in a perfect partner, a successful career, or the achievement of some long-term goal. While it's natural to have aspirations, when these goals become the focal point of our attention, we start to live in a constant state of anticipation. We begin to put our happiness on hold, thinking that it will only arrive when we achieve the next milestone or when our fantasies come to life. This mindset creates a sense of urgency and pressure that can cloud our ability to appreciate what is already present. We become so focused on the future that we forget to savor the present, missing out on the small, yet significant, moments that make life meaningful. For example, in relationships, when we are fixated on the idea of finding the perfect partner, we may overlook the potential of the people we meet in the present. We might be too preoccupied with an idealized version of loved one without conflict, mistakes, or misunderstandings to truly see and appreciate the person in front of us. In doing so, we prevent ourselves from forming genuine connections because we are always waiting for something better to come along. This constant yearning for perfection distorts our perception of what is good enough, leaving us dissatisfied with what is already in front of us. The same applies to friendships and family relationships, where the search for an idealized connection can cause us to miss out on the value of the relationships we already have. Similarly, in our careers or personal endeavors, when we become too focused on reaching an imagined point of success, we neglect to appreciate the growth and progress we are making in the present moment. Every step toward a goal, every lesson learned along the way, has value. But when we are consumed by a fantasy of what the future should look like, we overlook these valuable moments of growth. We may even burn out in the pursuit of this unattainable future, pushing ourselves beyond our limits without recognizing the importance of taking a step back to appreciate where we are right now. By constantly chasing after a future version of success, we miss the opportunity to be present and to truly enjoy the process of getting there. Living in a fantasy also prevents us from fully experiencing the world as it is. The world, in all its messiness, is filled with moments of beauty, connection, and discovery. But when we are lost in our fantasies, we are blind to what is happening around us. We fail to notice the little details that make life rich, whether it's the laughter of a friend, the warmth of a hug, or the quiet satisfaction of completing a small task. These moments may seem insignificant in the context of our grander dreams, but they are what make life meaningful. By focusing solely on what we think we want, we miss the simple joys that can bring us happiness in the here and now. The obsession with a perfect future also fosters a sense of impatience, where we are always looking ahead instead of living in the present. This impatience robs us of our peace of mind as we become anxious about the future, fixating on what has not yet come. We begin to feel that life is something to be endured rather than experienced, constantly measuring our worth and happiness by what we have yet to achieve. The present moment, with all its imperfections and challenges, is where true growth and fulfillment occur. When we let go of the fantasy and embrace the present as it is, we open ourselves up to a life that is more vibrant, more authentic, and ultimately more satisfying. Instead of continually chasing after an imagined future, we must learn to appreciate the beauty of the current moment. Life is not something to be postponed for an idealized future, it is something to be lived right now, in all its complexity and unpredictability. By grounding ourselves in the present, we cultivate mindfulness, gratitude, and a deeper sense of contentment. This shift in perspective allows us to break free from the cycle of longing for something more and start truly living the life that we already have. In conclusion, living in a fantasy may seem appealing at first, offering comfort, control, and an idealized vision of what our lives could be. However, the more we cling to these fantasies, the more we distance ourselves from the reality of who we are, what we have, and the opportunities in front of us. We limit our growth by avoiding the challenges and struggles that are necessary for true development. And we set ourselves up for disappointment when life inevitably doesn't align with our imagined world. Unrealistic expectations distort our relationships, our goals, and our sense of self, preventing us from experiencing the richness of life as it is. True fulfillment doesn't come from chasing a perfect future or avoiding the messiness of the present. It comes from embracing reality with all its imperfections and finding meaning in the process of growth, connection, and self-discovery. When we stop living in the world of what could be and start engaging with the world as it is, we allow ourselves to fully appreciate the people in our lives, the work we do, and the moments that make life truly worth living. We learn to let go of the need for perfection and control, understanding that the real beauty lies not in an idealized future, but in the present moment. By freeing ourselves from the grip of fantasy, we can live more authentically, embrace our challenges, and cultivate a deeper sense of purpose and satisfaction. Only when we accept the world as it is, and ourselves as we are, can we begin to truly live the life we are meant to lead.